My daughter and I put on the greatest performance of our lives that Saturday. And when it was all over, when the truth finally came out in front of everyone, every aunt, every cousin, every neighbor who had driven 3 hours to be there, I looked at my daughter's face and I thought, we did it, baby girl. We actually did it. But let me take you back to the morning it all started falling apart. Her name is Serena, my only child, 31 years old, bright as the sun, works as a physical therapist over in Charlotte. I raised her alone after her mother passed. Breast cancer 12 years ago, and I promised my wife on her last night that I would protect our daughter, that I would see her happy, that I would not let the world break her the way it had broken us. I kept that promise every day for 12 years, until the morning I almost failed. The wedding was set for 2 o'clock in the afternoon at Grace Fellowship, the same church where Serena was baptized, where her mother's funeral was held. It meant everything to her to get married there. She had been planning this day for 11 months. His name was Dominic Farrell. He was 36, worked in commercial real estate, drove a Lexus SUX, always had a story about some big deal closing next month. He and Serena had been together for 2 years. He proposed on her birthday down at the waterfront in Savannah, where we used to take family vacations. She called me that night crying happy tears. I heard her voice and I cried too. I wanted to love him. I tried. There was always something I couldn't name. The way he talked about money, not like someone who earned it, but like someone who was always chasing it. The way he'd look around a room before he looked at the person in front of him. Small things. I told myself I was being an overprotective father. Old habit, hard to break. The morning of the wedding I was at the church by 9:30. We had a breakfast gathering in the fellowship hall. Just family. Just the people closest to us. My sister Paulette had flown in from Houston. My brother-in-law Henry was there. Old friends from the neighborhood. People who had known Serena since she was riding her bike in the driveway. Dominic was in the hall too with his groomsmen. 4 guys, all loud, all laughing at something. I didn't know them well. He'd met most of them through some investment group he belonged to. I'd shaken their hands at the rehearsal dinner and forgotten their names by morning. Around 10:15, I stepped out to use the restroom at the far end of the hall, past the kitchen, past the storage closet where they kept the folding chairs. It was quiet back there. Old linoleum floors, fluorescent lights humming. I pushed through the side door, and I was about to round the corner into the corridor when I heard his voice. Dominic's voice. And then I stopped. I don't know what made me stop. Some instinct, some quiet warning in my chest. I stood there with my hand on the door, and I listened. I'm telling you, man, this is the cleanest setup I've ever walked into. His voice was low, but the hallway carried sound. Old man sitting on serious money, investment properties in 3 states. She doesn't even know the full picture. Nobody does. One of the groomsmen said something I couldn't make out. Dominic laughed. The kind of laugh that has no warmth in it at all. She thinks I'm in love with her. Come on. She's sweet, she is, but I've been managing this for 2 years. 2 years. You think I'd sit through Sunday dinners with her dad and his Bible stories for fun? He paused. The prenup she wanted? I've already got a guy who found 3 angles to challenge it. 6 months after we're married, I start moving. She won't see it coming. The corridor went silent except for the humming of those lights. I stood there with my hand still on that door, and I did not breathe. I had been a high school football coach for 31 years before I retired. I had stood on sidelines in pouring rain, 4th quarter, down by 10, and I had learned how to make my face say nothing while my mind ran through every option available. That training was the only thing that kept me standing upright in that hallway. I backed away slowly. I walked back through the side door. I found an empty Sunday school classroom. Little chairs, crayon drawings of Noah's Ark on the walls, and I sat down in one of those little chairs, and I thought the wedding was at 2 o'clock. It was 10:22. I had 3 hours and 38 minutes. My first thought was to go back in that hall and confront him right then, grab him by his collar in front of his friends and tell him I heard every word. But then what? He denies it. His friends back him up. I look like the difficult father-in-law who never liked him anyway. And Serena would be standing in her dress in a bridal suite upstairs, being told her father just ruined her wedding morning based on something he claims he overheard. No, I needed her to hear it herself. I needed there to be no doubt. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had already made up my mind. I called my daughter. She answered on the second rings, soft music playing in the background, bridesmaids laughing. "Daddy, is everything okay? I need to see you right now," I said alone. 5 minutes. Don't tell anyone. She heard something in my voice. She always could. She came down the back stairs, still in her bathrobe, her hair half done. When she saw my face, she stopped in the doorway. "Daddy, what happened?" I told her everything, word for word, exactly what I heard. I watched her face change. I watched the light in her eyes shift into something I had never seen there before, something hard and still and very, very quiet. She didn't cry. My daughter didn't cry. She sat down across from me in one of those little Sunday school chairs, hands folded in her lap, and she stared at the wall for a long moment. Then she looked at me and she said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" That was when I knew she was ready, and I told her the plan. I went back to the fellowship hall. I smiled. I shook hands. I hugged Paulette and told her she looked wonderful. I accepted a cup of coffee from one of the church ladies. And I stood there and I talked about the weather and the traffic and the fact that the tomatoes in my garden were doing real well this year. And across the room, Dominic was laughing with his groomsmen, straightening his tie in the reflection of the window, completely at ease. I excused myself around 11 and stepped back to that same hallway. This time I positioned myself differently. I pressed the voice memo app on my phone and slipped it into the breast pocket of my suit, opening facing out. Then I knocked on the side door of the room where Dominic and his groomsmen were gathered. "Hey," I said when he opened it. I smiled at him. I hated doing it, but I smiled. "You mind if I steal my future son-in-law for about 10 minutes? Want to give him something before the ceremony." He grinned, clapped me on the shoulder. "Of course, Russell. Let's step out." I led him into the hallway. We walked slowly toward the far end, away from the noise. I had an envelope in my hand. Inside was a letter I had written to Serena years ago, something I planned to give her on her wedding day. A real letter, nothing staged. I handed it to him and I said, "I'd like you to give this to her before she walks down the aisle. It's just for her. But I wanted to ask you man to man, you're going to take care of my daughter." I said it as a statement, not a question. He nodded, smooth as anything. "You know I will. She's everything to me. And the life you've built, the work you're doing, she's going to be secure. Absolutely. I'd never let anything happen to her." He smiled. "She's marrying into stability. I promise you that. Her financial interests," I said, calm as a Sunday morning. "You understand those are protected." Something flickered in his face. Just for a moment. "Of course. That's what the prenup is for." "Right," I said. "The prenup." I paused. Let the silence sit there. "You're committed to that agreement." 100%, he said. I nodded. I shook his hand. I told him I'd see him at the altar. I walked back toward the fellowship hall and I did not look back. My phone was still recording in my breast pocket. It wasn't much. It wasn't him confessing to his friends again. But it was him on record, affirming the prenup and Serena's financial security, which would matter later. And the recording from the hallway, the one my phone had been sitting 2 feet away from while I eavesdropped, that was still in my audio files. Not perfect quality, but clear enough. I made one more call before noon. I called my attorney. Not a family friend, not someone who did wills and traffic tickets. I mean my attorney, a woman named Patricia I had worked with for years when I was managing my investment properties. 40 years of practice. sharp as a tack, and she answered on the second ring because I told her it was urgent. I played her the recording. There was a long pause. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Ceremony's at 2. Another pause. "Don't cancel the wedding." "What?" "Don't cancel it. If you stop this now," on his word to his friends, "a good lawyer gets him out of everything. He denies it, says you misheard, says it was a joke. You have nothing legally binding." She was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Let me make some calls. You get through that ceremony. Serena knows, she knows." "Good. She needs to act completely normal. Can she do that?" I thought about my daughter's face in that Sunday school room, the stillness in her eyes. "Yes," I said. "She can do that. Then let the wedding happen. What he said to his friends gives us motive and intent. What he said to you on that recording gives us admission of agreement. The moment he takes one step toward contesting that prenup or moving funds, we have everything we need. Fraud, conspiracy, financial misconduct. We build the case from today, and we get him in a way he cannot walk away from." I stood there in the parking lot behind the church in my good suit, listening to the organ music starting up inside, and I understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone believe they've won. The ceremony was beautiful. I mean that. Even knowing what I knew, walking my daughter down that aisle was one of the most moving moments of my life. She was radiant, her grandmother's pearls, a dress she and her mother had dreamed about together years before her mother got sick. I had found a photo of the two of them, young Serena, maybe 7 years old, sitting on the bed with a bridal magazine, pointing at dresses. Serena had kept that dream. She had kept it even after everything. She held my arm and we walked slowly, and I kept my face exactly right. I whispered to her as we walked, "I love you. You are so strong." She squeezed my arm and she smiled, and her eyes were full of tears, and not one of them was for him. When I placed her hand in his, I looked at Dominic Farrell directly in the eyes. He smiled at me, confident, relaxed. I held his gaze for 1 extra second. Then I stepped back and I took my seat in the front pew. The reception was at a hall in downtown Charlotte. Riverfront venue, the one Serena had saved for since she was 28 years old. She loved the exposed brick walls, the string lights, the way the river looked at golden hour through the tall windows. He gave a toast, smooth, practiced, exactly the right mix of funny and sentimental. People applauded, people cried. My sister Paulette dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I sat at the head family table, and I smiled at everything. And I thought about nothing except what my attorney had told me. 1 step. The moment he takes 1 step. 22 days later, he took the step. He contacted a financial advisor, not Serena's, his own, someone she had never met, and began inquiring about the structure of my investment properties and whether a spousal interest could be established given certain language in state law. He did it quietly. He thought quietly was the same as invisible. It wasn't. My attorney had already filed protective documentation on every relevant asset the day after the wedding. The moment that inquiry landed, she had a record of it. She called me that evening. "He moved," she said. "Already?" 22 days. I've worked fraud cases where they waited 2 years. This one is impatient." She paused. "We're ready. I'd like to recommend we bring in a forensic accountant to trace any activity between now and." "What does Serena need to do?" I asked. "She needs to come in and sit with me this week. The grounds we have, the recording, the documented inquiry, the established intent, Serena can file for annulment, and we pursue the fraud claim simultaneously." I called my daughter that night. She was quiet for a moment when I told her. Then she said, "Okay, Daddy." Just like that. Okay. 2 weeks after that, we had a family dinner. Nothing special. Sunday dinner, same as always. Paulette was still in town because she had decided to stay longer, and I was grateful for that. Henry was there, a few of Serena's closest friends. Pot roast in the oven, cornbread from the same recipe her mother used, the table set with the blue dishes my wife had picked out at a flea market 20-something years ago. Dominic came to dinner. He sat at that table and ate my food and talked about a deal he had in Raleigh and asked Henry about his retirement and smiled at my daughter across the table. He had no idea. None. After dessert, when everyone else was in the living room, Serena and I stayed in the kitchen. She washed and I dried, the way we had done since she was tall enough to reach the sink. "You doing okay?" I asked her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I keep thinking about Mom." "Me too. She would have seen through him in 5 minutes." I laughed. A real laugh, the first one in weeks. 30 seconds, I said. "Your mother didn't waste time." Serena smiled. She handed me a dish. "I'm going to be okay, Daddy. I know you are. I mean it. I'm not broken over this. I'm angry, but I'm not broken." She paused. "I just want it done. It will be done." 3 days later, Serena's attorney served Dominic Farrell with the annulment filing. My attorney filed the fraud claim simultaneously. The forensic accountant had already traced 2 prior relationships, women he had targeted in similar circumstances, one in Atlanta and one in Raleigh, both of whom had settled quietly and moved on. He had a pattern, he had a history, and we had everything documented. He tried to deny it at first. His lawyer called my attorney and made some noise. It lasted about 2 weeks. Then it stopped. Because the recording was clear enough. Because his own financial advisor's records showed the timeline of his intent. Because the women in Atlanta and Raleigh, when contacted and told they weren't alone, decided they were done being quiet. Dominic Farrell left Charlotte. I don't know where he went, and I don't spend any time thinking about it. What I think about is Serena. I think about 6 months after all of it, when she came by on a Sunday afternoon just to sit on the back porch with me. We didn't talk about Dominic. We talked about her mother, and about a trip I was thinking about taking to see my college roommate out in Phoenix, and about whether I should repaint the back fence or just replace it. She stayed for 4 hours. Before she left, she hugged me in the driveway, and she held on for a long time. And she said, "Thank you, Daddy, for not stopping at the door." I held my daughter, and I thought about all the Sunday dinners, and all the late nights, and all the prayers I had sent up for her since she was a baby. I thought about the promise I had made to her mother. "That's what I'm here for," I said. She pulled back and she looked at me and she was smiling. A real smile, the one she has had since she was 3 years old, the one that looks exactly like her mother's. Then she got in her car and she drove away. I stood in the driveway until I couldn't see her taillights anymore. Then I went inside and I sat down at the kitchen table and I thanked God for placing me in that hallway at exactly 10:22 in the morning on a Saturday in October. Some things don't happen by accident. Most of the important ones don't.